Fix my uniform, Seamstress." He threw his jacket, she caught it and put on her own 5-star cap. The air in the Quartermaster Supply Depot Warehouse Bay 4 hung heavy and stagnant, a thick chemical miasma of industrial cleaner, new vinyl, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of improperly sealed weaponry lubricant. It was a smell endemic to logistics centers globally, the scent of endless bureaucracy and unacknowledged effort. The only movement was the slow, rhythmic sweep of a wide industrial cotton mop, guided by the small, almost insignificant figure of Cabo Valdez. Valdez was an apparition of faded utility in a landscape of newly issued crisp green perfection. Her uniform, a pair of BDU trousers and a utility top, was bleached several shades lighter than regulations permitted, softened by 1,000 washing cycles. It was clean, meticulously darned in places, but undeniably worn. Her boots, though polished, lacked the high, glossy mirror shine favored by parade ground recruits. They had the dull, competent scuff of boots that walked miles indoors on concrete. She was finishing the central aisle of Bay 4, the damp head of the mop dragging across the epoxy floor, emitting a low, whispering hiss that was swallowed instantly by the sheer volume of the cavernous space. The only other sound was the insistent, headache-inducing hum of the massive fluorescent light panels mounted 20 feet above, each tube contributing its tiny, sterile whine to the oppressive atmosphere. Valdez moved with a specific economy of motion. Every step was measured, every pivot of the mop bucket minimized. She was old enough that unnecessary movement cost currency she could ill afford. Her face, framed by wisps of gray hair tucked neatly beneath a simple olive-drab ball cap, was a map of deep creases, etched by weather and an unknown species of exhaustion. Her eyes, however, retained a peculiar, piercing stillness, often focused far past the immediate task, fixed on some distant, unseen horizon. She reached the designated service window, a plexiglass barrier separating the sacred, immaculate realm of the supply sergeant from the dusty, mortal world of the end user. Behind the barrier sat Sergeant E5 Davis. Davis was the embodiment of garrison logistics perfection. His uniform was so stiffly starched, it seemed carved from green granite. His sleeves were rolled exactly 3 inches above the elbow. His name tag and rank insignia gleamed with a self-satisfied brilliance. Davis was surrounded by the tools of his minor tyranny, clipboards stacked mathematically, forms color-coded, and a large, full mug of coffee positioned precisely in the center of a spotless desk blotter. Valdez waited. She did not clear her throat or tap the counter. She simply stood, resting the mop handle against her shoulder, her posture straight, breathing shallowly. Davis, aware of her presence, meticulously finished highlighting a row on a requisition form. He signed it with a flourish that indicated the immense gravity of the task, then placed his pen down with a tiny, echoing click. He finally looked up, his eyes gliding over Valdez's uniform, settling dismissively on the mop. "Yes?" His voice was a flat, bureaucratic monotone, laced with a barely concealed irritation at being interrupted by anything less than a 3-star general. "Sergeant," Valdez began, her voice low, gravelly from disuse. "Cabo Valdez, I require a small issue. Uniform materials." Davis leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest plate, a gesture that made his biceps strain against the crisp material. "Materials. This isn't the alteration shop, Cabo. This is Class 2 supply. You need replacement kit, fill out a 34-9. You need minor repairs, go see Mrs. Rodriguez across the street." "It's not repair, Sergeant," Valdez clarified, her eyes unwavering. "It's a specific item, thread, mil-spec 346, high-tenacity polyester, coyote brown, and 2 square feet of hook-and-loop Velcro, adhesive backing, male side. I've run out of the allowance for the custodial equipment pouches." Davis blinked slowly, savoring the moment of deliberate incomprehension. He chuckled, a small, patronizing sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You need Velcro and thread? Cabo, that's a petty cash expense. Go to the PX. We don't issue consumables like that here. This is a strategic warehouse." He waved a hand toward the vast, dimly lit interior, where palletized boxes of optics and radios sat stacked to the ceiling, all designated as highly sensitive material. "Sergeant," Valdez insisted gently, but with a hard edge of determination. "The custodial equipment, the harnesses and pouches for the floor polishers, are government issue. They require constant minor repair due to caustic solvent erosion. The requisition was filed last week, signed off by Chief Petty Officer Sterling's office." Davis frowned, his perfect brow creasing slightly. He hated anything that smelled of paperwork already signed by higher command. He pulled a thick binder toward him, flipping through the pages with unnecessary force. "Sterling's office, right. That would explain the excessive authorization," Davis muttered under his breath, loud enough to be heard. "Ah, here we are. Requisition 449B. 1 spool of thread, 1 sheet Velcro. Are you serious, Cabo? We have operators shipping out to the sandbox, waiting on plate carriers, and you're clogging my inventory system with sewing supplies." He slammed the binder shut. The sound echoed unnaturally in the vast space, momentarily silencing the HVAC hum. "Look, Cabo Valdez," Davis said, leaning forward conspiratorially, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am denying this issue. It is an inefficient use of my time and resources. Go to the PX, use your own money, it's $5. Consider it an investment in your tools, or better yet." Davis stood up, adjusting his belt. He reached for a fresh, unmarked patrol jacket hanging on a hook behind him, the material still glossy with factory finish. He found a loose thread near the collar, pulled at it until it snagged, and then, with a flourish of utter disrespect, he threw the pristine jacket through the open service gap. The jacket landed squarely on the floor at Valdez's worn boots. "Fix my uniform, Seamstress." Davis spat out the word seamstress like a piece of spoiled meat. "The stitching is loose. While you're at it, get rid of that pitiful mop and figure out how to operate a washing machine." The humiliation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Valdez's hands tightened around the mop handle until her knuckles turned bone white. Her eyes, previously distant, snapped into a sudden frightening focus on the arrogant sergeant. She slowly bent down. The act was deliberate, weighted. She picked up the jacket. It felt crisp and alien in her rough hands. She did not look at Davis. Instead, she looked at the faint gray dust motes dancing in the beams of the fluorescent lights, swirling over the polished concrete floor, and for the briefest of moments, the warehouse dissolved. The dust turned to fine, choking silt. The sterile, cool air became thin, scorching heat. The metallic tang of lubricant vanished, replaced by the pervasive, sickly scent of burning plastic and blood. Backstory expanded. The heat of the Gilzai Valley. The shift was instantaneous, profound, and utterly overwhelming. Valdez was no longer standing in Bay 4 of the Quartermaster Depot. She was in the searing, breathless heat of the Hindu Kush foothills nearly 20 years ago. She had a different name then, or rather, a different identifier, Corporal Alina Kozłowska, attached to the Wojska Specjalne, Polish Special Forces, specifically the unit designated J.W. Grom. Her nickname was Valkyrie. The date was critical, July 17th. The mission, a joint U.S.-Polish task force, Task Force 16, attempting to interdict a high-value Taliban command cell operating near the Gilzai Valley, Afghanistan. Alina felt the phantom weight of her kit pressing down on her shoulders. Not the light, faded cotton of the janitorial uniform, but 65 pounds of sheer, life-preserving composite, the LWH helmet, the plate carrier with level 4 ceramic inserts, 8 full magazines for the barrel rifle, water, radios, and medical trauma kits. The humidity of the logistics center was nothing compared to the desert air that day, thin, dry, scorching, making every inhaled breath feel like breathing glass shards. They had been moving for 48 hours. The American team leader, Captain Miller, later to become the revered MCPO Sterling, though Alina didn't know that yet, was setting the pace. Slow, tactical, agonizingly silent. Alina remembered the absolute quiet preceding the disaster. It wasn't natural quiet. It was the suffocating silence of anticipation. The sun beat down, turning the rocks into searing hot plates. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the dried, shale-like earth, the creak of webbing, and the relentless mechanical pump of adrenaline in her own ears. She was the rear security element, her eyes sweeping the ridgelines. She felt the vibration first, a low tremor that rattled in her jawbone, a sound too deep to be heard by the human ear, but perceived by the body as pure, sickening threat. Then, the light. It wasn't just a flash, it was a physical blow, a sudden, blinding white sun exploding from the ground 40 meters ahead of the point man. The sound followed instantly, a colossal chest-compressing crack that was less noise and more a wave of concussive force. Alina was thrown violently forward, slamming her helmet against the rocks. For a moment, she was suspended in chaos, the air filled with fragmented earth, pulverized metal, and the sickening scent of burnt explosives. A high, agonizing ringing replaced all other sound. IED. Massive, perhaps a stacked anti-tank mine. When her vision cleared, the patrol formation was gone. The point man, a young Delta operator named Rodriguez, was simply missing. Captain Miller was down, lying prone behind a large boulder, struggling to orient himself, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Alina's Grom training kicked in, cold and immediate. She rolled onto her stomach, checking her weapon. Barrel functional, and her body intact, ringing but functional. "Contact! Contact!" Miller screamed, the word garbled through the radio static and the ringing in Alina's ears. The secondary ambush began immediately. Automatic fire, a heavy, relentless spray of AK fire, raked the area from the high ground. The Taliban had waited perfectly, timing their attack to follow the shock of the IED. Alina instinctively returned fire, 3 short, disciplined bursts toward the flash signature on the ridge, suppressing the enemy long enough to allow her to crawl toward Miller. The terrain was exposed. Every yard of movement was a calculated risk of death. She pushed off the ground, dragging her rifle, ignoring the hot shrapnel embedding itself into the dry earth inches from her helmet. She reached Miller, sliding in beside him. He was trying to put pressure on his leg, his face pale beneath the grime. "Valkyrie, my comms are shot. How bad?" Miller gasped, his voice tight with pain and urgency. "Compound fracture, sir. You're losing blood fast. Shrapnel to the torso. Radio operational, but weak. They have the high ground. We are pinned." Alina didn't wait for orders. Survival superseded chain of command. She ripped open her trauma pack, ignoring the incoming fire that chewed chunks out of the boulder shielding them. She applied a cat tourniquet high on Miller's thigh, cranking the rod until the flow was stanched, an action that wrenched a guttural scream from the captain, quickly choked back. She then stabilized the break using her rifle cleaning rod and 2 rigid pieces of plastic from her rations packaging. The Taliban fire intensified. They were maneuvering to flank them. Alina saw 2 figures moving along the crest, silhouetted against the bright sky, closing the distance. She took a deep, shuddering breath. This was the moment of decision: retreat and drag Miller, or hold the line. "Sir, I need 5 minutes," Alina said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I need you on that radio, running triage for the others. I'm going to draw their attention." "Negative, Valkyrie. You stay put. We hold. We die here, sir," she stated flatly. "I move. They focus on me. It buys time for the extraction bird." Before Miller could protest, Alina shoved a spare magazine into her jacket pocket. The memory of this specific action, the rough texture of the magazine against the fabric, was startlingly vivid, and she leaped from cover. She ran not toward the enemy, but laterally, drawing a massive concentrated torrent of fire onto her position. She sprinted through the open field of fire, laying down bursts of suppressing fire, making noise, making movement, making herself the target. The next hour was a blur of tactical chaos. Alina moved like a ghost, utilizing tiny folds in the ground, broken ditches and shadows cast by the setting sun. She was fighting a two-front war, the relentless insurgents on the ridgeline and the rising physical demand of exhaustion. Her ammunition count dwindled rapidly. At one point, she found herself trapped in a deep ravine, 3 enemy fighters attempting to converge on her position. Her barrel clicked empty. Instead of panicking, she transitioned seamlessly to her sidearm, a Polish Vis 35 Radom pistol, an antique by modern standards, but reliable. She dropped 2 of the fighters with precision headshots, the third retreating in panic. She then retrieved the enemy's AK-74, stripped the magazine, and continued the fight using captured ordnance. The extraction arrived only after the sun had dipped entirely, plunging the valley into deep, treacherous shadow. The sound of the MH6 Little Bird slicing the air was the most beautiful sound Alina had ever heard. She was the last one to be pulled onto the bird, physically dragging Miller, who was barely conscious, into the cabin. Her uniform was torn, blood-soaked, not all of it hers, and smelled strongly of cordite and sweat. Back at Bagram, during the required debriefing, Alina refused medical attention until she had ensured every surviving member of the task force was accounted for. Her actions, saving her commander, delaying the enemy flank, and fighting effectively for an hour under sustained heavy fire using improvised weapons, were detailed extensively in the operational reports. For that day and for the subsequent months, she remained in theater providing critical support. She was nominated for, and later awarded, Poland's highest combat decoration for bravery, the Krzyż Walecznych, Cross of Valor. But the cost was immense. The silence of the night, the weight of the losses, the realization that no amount of courage could truly shield her from the pervasive violence. It broke something deep inside her, something that only anonymity and quiet service could attempt to mend. She eventually left the fighting forces, sought a quiet life and emigrated, finding her peace in the most humble of positions. The endless, repetitive purification of the military machine, a job where the only tool required was a mop and the only enemy was dust. Acti 3. The intervention. The memory, though compressed into a terrifying microsecond, released its grip on Valdez. She was back in the sterile, air-conditioned hell of Bay 4. Sergeant Davis was still standing, his chest puffed out, waiting for her reaction to his deliberate insult. Valdez held his uniform jacket, the factory-fresh stiffness, a stark contrast to her faded fatigue. She looked at the loose thread he had yanked. Davis smirked. "Well, get to it, Cabo. Or are you going to stand there all day and soak my floor with that thing?" Before Valdez could articulate the cold, furious rebuttal that was bubbling in her throat, a new sound cut through the humming silence. It was the sound of heavy, deliberate boots, not the sharp, hollow echo of garrison-polished boots, but the dull, weighty thud of custom-fitted combat boots, worn down not by concrete, but by endless friction with foreign terrain. A figure emerged from the main corridor, stopping at the edge of the service window. Master Chief Petty Officer, MCPO, Sterling. If Davis was the epitome of garrison perfection, Sterling was the living monument to controlled chaos and brutal efficiency. His uniform was dark, almost black, perfectly fitted, but the creases were soft, earned by continuous wear and washing, not starch. He wore no frivolous decorations or patches, only his name, the seal trident insignia, and the anchor that denoted his command seniority. His eyes, the color of aged bourbon, surveyed the scene with an immediate dangerous stillness. He was massive, not in bulk, but in sheer presence. He radiated the kind of quiet authority that needed no shouting to enforce silence. Davis, catching sight of the command master chief, snapped instantly to attention, dropping his arrogance like a shedskin. "MCPO Sterling, sir. My apologies, I didn't realize you were observing," Davis stammered, pulling himself up straighter. "Just dealing with a minor requisition issue." Sterling did not acknowledge Davis. His eyes were locked entirely on Cabo Valdez, who still held the discarded patrol jacket. "Cabo Valdez." Sterling's voice was deep, resonant, and shockingly gentle. I came to verify the status of requisition 449B. My logistics officer indicated there was a hang-up. Davis immediately intervened, his voice eager to please. No hang-up, Chief, just a minor delay. She was requesting personal sewing supplies, non-essential. I was simply clarifying the protocol, sir. She needs to understand that. Sterling raised a single hand, stopping Davis mid-sentence. The gesture was minimal yet absolute. Davis froze, his mouth agape. Sterling stepped closer to the window, minimizing the distance between himself and Valdez. He didn't look down at her. He looked at her, levelly. "Cabo," Sterling repeated, his tone shifting, becoming marginally firmer, tinged with a familiarity that made Davis's breath catch. "Is there a problem with the issuance of the materials specified in the requisition I signed?" Valdez slowly put the mop down, resting the damp head against the wall. She held the jacket loosely. "The sergeant stated that the issue was trivial, Master Chief," Valdez replied, her voice steady now, purged of the earlier pain. "He instructed me to utilize my own funds for the material and subsequently requested that I repair this garment." She held up Davis's jacket slightly, "as I am, quote, a seamstress," end quote. Davis's face was rapidly losing color. He tried to interrupt. "That is not what I meant, Chief. It was a poor joke, sir, I assure you." Sterling's gaze finally settled on Davis. It was a look of cold, surgical assessment, the kind of look a predator gives to injured prey. "Sergeant Davis," Sterling said, the slow cadence of his words forcing every syllable to carry the weight of an ordnance drop. "You are aware that the custodial unit's equipment pouches are classified as government property, requiring mil-spec materials for repair, correct?" "Yes, sir, but—" "And you are aware that issuing supplies covered by a signed requisition from a command element is mandatory, provided inventory exists?" "Yes, sir, but the scale of the request—" Sterling stepped back, rubbing the stubble on his jawline. "The scale, right." He looked back at Valdez. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her hands, which still held the sergeant's jacket. Specifically, he was looking at the back of her left hand, exposed when she gripped the fabric. Davis missed it entirely. But Sterling, whose job involved identifying minute details in environments of absolute chaos, did not. He saw the faded, nearly invisible line of scar tissue that ran from the base of her thumb, up the wrist, and disappeared under her faded sleeve. More importantly, he saw the edge of an old, intricate tattoo, barely peeking out from beneath the cuff of her utility top. The tattoo wasn't a skull or a trident. It was a stylized, historical depiction of a Polish eagle perched on a scroll bearing two words, honor and ojczyzna, homeland. It was the insignia of the Polish Special Operations Forces. Sterling's expression remained neutral, but the air around him thickened with sudden realization. "Cabo Valdez?" Sterling asked, the gentleness returning, laced now with something akin to reverence. "Would you be kind enough to show me your identification, please?" Davis scoffed under his breath. "Chief, her ID is clearly visible. She's Cabo Valdez, custodial." Sterling cut him off with a whisper that was far more dangerous than any shout. "Silence, Sergeant. Stand at attention and remain still." Davis snapped stiffly, his stomach beginning to churn with genuine fear. Valdez looked at Sterling. Her piercing eyes seemed to search his face, analyzing him for sincerity. She recognized the look of a warrior who knew sacrifice. She saw no contempt, only respect. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into the deep cargo pocket of her faded BDU trousers. She pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. Instead of a typical ID card, she extracted a single, official-looking document, folded and plasticized, along with a small metal object. She passed them both across the counter to Sterling. Sterling took the items. He didn't look at the ID card. He looked at the metal object first. It was a medal, heavily antiqued brass, attached to a ribbon of deep maroon bordered by white stripes. It was worn thin, but the central image was unmistakable, a crusader's shield bearing a sword, wreathed in laurels. Sterling swallowed hard. His massive hand trembled slightly as he read the inscription etched on the reverse side of the cross. He then opened the laminated document. It was a formal military discharge and citation, written in Polish and translated into English military jargon. Sterling began to read the citation aloud, his voice dropping in volume, turning into a steady, measured drone that filled the silent depot. Citation for Corporal Alina Kozłowska, Wojska Specjalne, J.W. Grom, Sterling began. Davis tried to peek at the paper, his confusion mounting. Date of action, July 17, 2004, Gilzai Valley, Afghanistan. Sterling paused, breathing deeply. He looked up, his eyes now shining with an emotion Valdez understood completely, the shared recognition of the abyss. The recipient, then Corporal Kozłowska, displayed conspicuous gallantry and extraordinary tactical prowess during a coordinated IED strike and subsequent ambush that decimated Task Force 16. Sterling's voice gained strength, the words ringing with historical gravity. Despite sustaining concussive trauma and heavy shrapnel wounds, Corporal Kozłowska immediately took command of the disoriented rear element. She ignored direct orders to stabilize position and instead exposed herself to a sustained field of automatic fire, diverting the enemy's flanking maneuver for 45 minutes. During this period, she personally eliminated 3 insurgents who had closed the distance, utilizing captured ordnance after her primary weapon went dry. Sterling looked directly at Davis, who was now sweating profusely, his pristine uniform dampening under the glare of the Command Master Chief. Crucially, she provided life-saving trauma care to the task force commander, a captain, under continuous enemy engagement, stabilizing a compound fracture and arterial bleed, enabling his eventual extraction. Sterling lowered the citation slightly, his focus returning to the medal itself. This is the Krzyż Walecznych, Sterling articulated the Polish name slowly, precisely. The Cross of Valor. It is granted for acts of bravery and heroism far exceeding the call of duty. It is, Sergeant Davis, the highest military honor Poland grants to combat personnel. Sterling looked at the faint scar on Valdez's hand, the one that ran beneath the tactical eagle. He knew that scar was consistent with pulling shrapnel out of her own forearm while running the triage. He looked back at Davis. Do you understand, Sergeant, who you have just referred to as a seamstress? Davis's face was the color of dirty ash. He couldn't speak. He just shook his head, a pathetic, tremulous movement. Corporal Kozłowska, now Cabo Valdez, is a soldier who has fought in a theater that few men in this installation have even visited, Sterling stated. The captain she saved is well known to me, Sergeant. He owes her his life. We all owe her for ensuring the operational success of that mission and for upholding the honor of our allied forces. Sterling gently placed the citation and the Cross of Valor back on the counter. He pushed them toward Valdez, his fingers barely brushing hers. Ma'am, Sterling said, using the highest form of military respect he could offer. I am profoundly sorry that a member of my supported logistics chain has displayed this level of egregious disrespect toward a decorated combat veteran. He turned on Davis, who was visibly shaking. Sergeant Davis, you are relieved of your duties immediately. Report to my office in 1 hour. Bring your uniform jacket. I want to see every stitch removed from that emblem, Davis whimpered. Yes, Master Chief. Valdez slowly gathered her medal and citation. She looked down at the patrol jacket she still held, the one Davis had thrown at her feet. She folded it meticulously, military style, and placed it back on the counter next to the terrified sergeant. She didn't speak, but she reached into the pocket that contained her personal effects. She pulled out her mop cap, faded and soft, and replaced it with something she had carried hidden beneath her cleaning supplies, a pristine, dark blue command cap, heavily embroidered, bearing 5 silver stars. It wasn't a general's cap. It was a custom-made, unofficial memento, a gift from the captain she saved. It was the insignia of her old Grom unit, stylized with 5 stars representing the 5 confirmed hostiles she eliminated on that critical day. It was her private declaration of eternal service. She set the 5-star cap on her head, adjusting the brim perfectly straight. MCPO Sterling watched this quiet ceremony. He understood that Valdez, having served at the apex of military violence, had chosen the quiet anonymity of the mop, but the warrior code remained absolute. Sterling reached behind his back. He unsnapped the sling from his primary weapon, a highly customized compact Mk18 Mod 1 carbine, painted matte black, with several subtle combat-specific modifications. It was his personal rifle, his most trusted tool, often referred to within the SEAL teams as the Holy Ghost. He took the rifle, carefully cleared the chamber, locked the bolt back, and rested the buttstock on the floor. Then, with the precision and gravity of a 20-year veteran conducting a formal change of command, Master Chief Sterling lifted the Mk18 and presented it to Cabo Valdez, muzzle toward the ceiling, bolt open, as a sign of complete trust and veneration. "Corporal Kozłowska," Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion, "I present this to you, not as a weapon, but as a recognition of your sacrifice. The military does not run on paperwork, Sergeant Davis." Sterling glanced scornfully at the trembling man. "It runs on the blood and courage of people like her. Accept this, ma'am, as my personal oath of respect." The silence returned. But this time, it was not bureaucratic or oppressive. It was holy. Valdez looked at the Mk18, the heavy barrel, the scent of fresh carbon and oil. It felt familiar, a physical language she once spoke fluently. She reached out and took the rifle from Sterling's hands. The steel was cold and comforting. For a fleeting second, the ghost of Valkyrie stood in the quartermaster depot. She held the rifle for perhaps 3 full, agonizing seconds, the longest stretch of silence Bay 4 had ever known. Then she gave a slow, measured nod of acknowledgement to Sterling. The simple movement conveyed more gratitude than any speech ever could. She handed the Mk18 back to him, buttstock first. "Thank you, Master Chief," Valdez whispered, the quiet acceptance of his respect settling over her like a heavy blanket. "But I have found my purpose here." She reached across the counter, her eyes fixed on the trembling Sergeant Davis. "Sergeant," she commanded, the voice suddenly carrying the cold authority of a high-ranking officer in combat. "My requisition, now." Davis, utterly broken, scrambled instantly, pulling the requested thread and Velcro from the sealed shelves. He practically shoved the materials into her hand. Valdez took the small spool of thread and the square of adhesive Velcro. She tucked them neatly into her pocket. She picked up the mop, adjusted the 5-star cap on her head, and turned. She resumed her methodical cleaning. The damp mop once again whispered across the floor, leaving a clean, straight line in its wake, carrying the weight of Afghanistan and the silent, absolute honor of a warrior who had chosen peace. The massive warehouse, the domain of paperwork and bureaucracy, had just been purified by an act of profound, earned respect. Cabo Valdez continued her work, leaving Master Chief Sterling standing stiffly at attention, his customized carbine held loosely at his side, watching the hero disappear into the silent, vast anonymity of Bay 4.